am Dr. Khouri from Montreal, and I'm going to talk to you about manual phaco fragmentation, which is an alternative to phacoemulsification. The 1990s brought us small incision cataract surgery with its numerous advantages, but it brought us also phacoemulsification with its difficulties. Manual phaco fragmentation is an excellent technique. It gives us small incision cataract surgery with its advantages, but not many surgeons have the skill to perform it, and they left it because of its ominous deleterious complications. So, being afraid of the phacoemulsification, they left the small incision cataract surgery. But I developed this manual phaco fragmentation, which is an excellent alternative of small incision cataract surgery to phacoemulsification, and it also has many advantages and much less dangers than the phacoemulsification, which I'm going to show to you. I start opening the eye the usual way, and I prefer the pocket incision technique with a sutureless wound construction. I open the wound as wide as the IOL to implant, and under viscoelastic I perform a small capsular access, which is about 4 to 5 millimeters, and with this needle mounted on this 3 millimeter syringe, and this needle is 23 gauge needle and ended with a spatula-like plateau, and it is made to me by Rhine Medical as well as the other instruments. So this end spatula goes on one side under the rim of the anterior capsule, and by irrigation we do a hydrodissection of the nucleus. Then we turn around to the other side, and we also engage the spatula under the other rim of the anterior capsule. And watch my hands here. My one hand holds the syringe to flush, and the other hand holds the neck to stabilize the needle, and by pushing the needle tip, which is the spatula, around the nuclear equator, we progressively flush and irrigate as well as we turn. And once the spatula behind the nucleus, we have almost finished the 3/4 of the BSS. At the same time, the nucleus comes out of the capsular access like a button through a buttonhole, and it is already in the anterior chamber. By continuing the flushing, we take out the needle, and then we fill up the anterior chamber with viscoelastic to protect the endothelium as well as the posterior capsule. Most importantly, the endothelium, because the posterior capsule is already safe. Then we take with the left hand, if you're right-handed like me, with the left hand you take this cutting board, which is very thin, angulated 45 degrees onward and laterally, and it is a little bit concave anteriorly to have the shape of a spoon to hold the nucleus from below. And with your right hand you take this other cutting blade, which is a double blade like a fork, and this is why I call this technique the spoon and fork technique. So the spoon goes behind the nucleus and pushes a little bit backward to increase the space between the anterior nucleus and the endothelium, and you sneak just above the nucleus this fork, and by crossing the blades you push one against the other until the two blades meet, and then you withdraw the blades, and most of the time the middle portion of the nucleus comes out with the spoon and fork, leaving behind the two lateral portions of the nucleus. Those lateral portions of the nucleus are irrigated out with this irrigating vectors, which is a 23 gauge needle with 2 irrigating holes, flattened anteroposterior diameter, and about 3 millimeters lateral diameter. You do not push on the nuclear pieces, but you only fish mouth the wound, and the nuclear pieces are flushed out very smoothly, leaving behind the residual cortex, which you INA with any piece of INA you want. I prefer the Simcoe INA needle, and under viscoelastic I implant the IOL, which I have chosen in advance. Now let me show you this technique on video. This first case is about 5 millimeters large. The wound constructed suturelessly, weigh about 2 millimeters in the cornea, and I usually open the wound, the sutureless type technique, as large as the IOL to implant. And like you see in this case is about 5 millimeters because the optic is about 5. And under visco protection, I do a careful capsular access, a little bit smaller than the IOL to implant. And with this spatulated needle done for me by Ryan Medical, and which has an irrigate in one face ended by the spatulated end. Here we're going first to the left side, and we slide the spatula under the capsular access edge, and under hydro irrigation and expression, we turn it around the equator of the nucleus to the posterior part of the nucleus, and you see here under a generous irrigation with BSS, the nucleus is extruded out of the bag like a button through a buttonhole, and the nucleus is rotated back and forth to put it in the anterior chamber in front of the iris and the pupil, leaving the bag behind and all the structures safe. And under visco protection, we slide this spoon and fork, which is my spoon and fork technique. The spoon is this spatula which goes behind the nucleus, and the fork is this double cutting instrument which goes in front of the nucleus, and the two squeezed together will cut the nucleus into 3 equal pieces, and the middle portion most of the time comes out of the anterior chamber, leaving behind the 2 lateral portions of the nucleus, like here. And the 2 lateral portions are extruded under irrigation with this irrigating vectors of mine done also by Ryan Medical. And this is a 23 gauge needle flattened to take the least place possible, and you irrigate the nuclear pieces out and also the epinucleus here by fish mouthing the wound. The residual cortex is aspirated by this INA Simcoe needle, and I'm quite aggressive in cleaning all the cortex and also the residual anterior capsular cells which are left behind the anterior capsule around the capsular axis, like here. I do it with the INA of Simcoe Dahan, and with this subincisional INA needle of mine, we aspirate all the cortex left behind with the Simcoe needle. This is very efficacious to extract the subincisional residual cortex, and with the same needle as you see, we can also inspect if there is any residual cortex behind the incision we've done. And here I have caught a little bit of the posterior capsule, and being a manual technique, it's absolutely under control, and I have very, very, very seldom broken a posterior capsule with this technique. and you see the IOL is implanted in the bag under visco elastic material. This is another case I'm demonstrating which has a relatively harder nucleus, and I'm using on the right side a hydrodissection with the same needle, and we turn the needle inside to go to the left side here and slide it behind the capsular axis edge and under irrigation, and this irrigation is proven with this air bubble. Under irrigation we slide it around the equator and to the posterior aspect of the nucleus, and also again under irrigation you see here also the air bubbles. We irrigate the nucleus by dissecting it from the posterior capsule and sliding it out of the bag like a button through a buttonhole to the anterior chamber, and this nucleus here is cut the same way. Now we have done a Miyake view of our technique just to prove its effectiveness and also its safety to the zonules. You see here we have done about 5 millimeter capsular axis, and with this prototype of my irrigating needle, we hydrodissect to one side of the nucleus here on the upper left. Then we go to the opposite side, which is here on the right side. And under irrigation, we slide it around the capsular axis edge and around the equator of the nucleus to the posterior capsule. And under irrigation, the nucleus is taken out of the bag without any threat, like you see, to the zonules. And here the nucleus is gone, the capsular axis is absolutely intact, and it was quite small. And you see here it was a little bit smaller than this 5 millimeter IOL. Now we have tried also this lateral window view, and as you know, under the cut pie of this cornea, there are no zonules at all. So all zonules are only here on the upper part between 730 and 430. So we do a careful capsular axis, and we slide this needle of mine, spatulated needle of mine, around the equator of the nucleus behind the capsular axis, and look at the hydrodissection, which gives a small golden ring underneath, and you see the nucleus comes out of the bag without any too much motion of the crystalline lens and threat to the zonules. And with irrigation, this nucleus is luxated in the anterior chamber, and with this spatula and the here we're using a Sinskey hook, I'm cutting the needle, the nucleus, and the pieces are extracted from the anterior chamber, leaving behind residual cortex, which is aspirated with this INA system at Dr. Apple's facilities. And at the end, I'm filling the bag with Helon here, just to prove that all the bag is absolutely intact and all the structures are there, and there was no further zonular rupture. Now this is a small pupil case which is not easy to do a phacoemulsification upon, and you see with my technique it's quite easy to perform this nuclear expression. So we do a careful capsular access through this sutureless wound construction, and with my needle we hydrodissect on one side and then go to the opposite side, and the needle sliding around the nuclear equator behind it, and under hydro expression the nucleus is put out of its bag, and by rotating it back and forth it comes to the anterior chamber, leaving behind the bag and the iris and pupil. And under visco protection, we again cut the nucleus into 3 pieces, and with this spoon and fork technique, and we use the same technique like the previous cases. This is a 3.5, 3.6 opening for a silicone implant. So you see we can do silicone implants with this technique, and we are doing a sutureless opening, and this is a 3.5 opening knife, and we go way in the cornea, not being afraid of the dimpling of the cornea like we would do with phacoemulsification. We perform a small capsular access, and again undo hydrodissection on one side and hydroexpression on this side. We slide it the same way under the capsular access around the nucleus equator, and by hydro dissecting the nucleus, it comes out of the bag, helped by the spatulated needle by rotating it, and you see this nucleus is quite hard, so it wasn't easy to luxate in the anterior chamber. And under visco protection, we slide the spoon, which is the spatula, behind the nucleus, and the fork, which is the cutting instrument, above the nucleus, and by joining the two instruments together, we cut the nucleus into 3 equal pieces, and this middle portion is taken out of the anterior chamber like you see here, leaving behind the 2 lateral portions of the nucleus, which are irrigated out with my irrigating vectors. By fish mouthing this wound, those pieces come out of the anterior chamber without any difficulty. Never press that irrigating vectors against the endothelium. You don't need it. Only the irrigating force of the BSS will push the pieces out of the bag by fish mouthing the wound. You see here I'm also expressing the epinucleus only by fish mouthing this wound, and the residual cortex is again aspirated with a Simcoe INA, and the 12 o'clock with my subincisional INA. And here's the silicone lens, which is implanted in the bag through this 3.5 millimeter opening. And this Sinskey hook helps it to position. And this is another case where we are luxating the nucleus in the anterior chamber, and we are trying to go in with my fork, which was a little bit difficult to go in because this was a high hyperope. So instead of using the fork, I'm using a Sinskey hook here with my spatula, which is separated, and the nucleus would not slide above it, and we're cutting the nucleus into different pieces. And here we're cutting about 4 pieces, and being very hard, these nuclear pieces are extracted with my nuclear pieces extracting forceps, which is also done by Rhine Medical, and the forceps is ring-ended on both sides. That's a small opening at the end of the forceps, and this forceps also can be used if you have a posterior rupture to extract the residual nuclear or cortical pieces which are mixed with vitreous. And you see here I'm trying to extract the last piece, and I'm using my irrigating vectors to irrigate at the same time the residual epinucleus and a cortex. Here I'm aspirating the residual cortex. Also, this is the subincisional INA of system of mine, and I'm inserting this silicone lens. and you see through this 3.5 millimeter opening, which has nothing to envy to a phaco emulsification case. This manual phaco fragmentation technique you see is very efficacious. It's a non-phaco small manual technique of cataract extraction. It's a good adjunct to phaco emulsifying surgeons, and it helps everybody to know how to deal with nuclear pieces while cataract extracting. And good luck to everyone who wants to try it. And if you need any questions, please don't hesitate to get in contact with me or Ryan Medical.